So in this last section of Chapter 14, we want to talk a little bit more about the second line of defense and then some of the mechanisms that it utilizes. And so the first one that we mention is inflammation. So I need you to understand a couple things about inflammation. First off, it is non-specific, okay, but it supports and interacts with the specific immune responses, as does some of these other mechanisms that play a role in your host defense, like phagocytosis, interferons, which we're going to look at in just a second, and recognition of foreign cells. And so, as far as inflammation is concerned, you need to know that inflammation is a normal response. So it is the way that your body reacts or responds to any traumatic event in your tissues. So if there is tissue damage in any form or fashion, inflammation will occur. Now, a lot of people think inflammation is a bad thing because it can harm you, it can hurt, right? But it's also a good note in that it allows you to understand that your body recognizes the injury, right? So your body recognizes that there's something wrong, that there's a problem, and it seeks to kind of rectify that. And so the benefit of inflammation is it helps to clear away invading microbes, any type of cellular debris, and kind of return those tissues back to a normal state. So 4 characteristics that we associate with inflammation, one of them being redness, another being warmth, swelling, and then pain. And so quick reasoning behind what happens. So the reason that an inflamed area gets red is because in order to deal with that damage, your body's going to increase circulation. So you're going to increase the amount of blood that's flowing to that area. The blood vessels are going to get larger. They're going to get wider so that you can get more blood to that area. And so more blood is going to increase the color of the redness. The reason that warmth is there is because blood is warm, right? It's circulating through your body. It's got that warm internal body temperature to it. So if you're increasing the amount of warm blood in that area, then it's going to heat the entire area. So an inflamed area is not only going to appear red because of increased blood flow, but it's also going to have a warm feeling to touch. Swelling, obviously if you're increasing blood flow, you're increasing the fluid in that area, not just in the blood vessels, but in the tissues that surround them. And so you're going to experience some edema, some swelling. We also know that you're going to, as you increase blood flow, you're going to also increase the number of cells that are there. Potentially microbes and debris also found in that area. They're going to form what's known as pus, right? And so that kind of causes a swelling in that area. And then, of course, pain, because depending on the damage, it could stimulate some nerve endings. So there could be some damage there to nervous tissue, and so that could stimulate a pain response. So what we want to look at really quickly are some of the major events, the 4 major events that are associated with an inflammatory response. And so the first thing that happens, let's just say that you have a wound, right? So something stuck in you, maybe it's a splinter, or maybe it's something larger like a needle or something like that. And so let's say that you have a puncture wound. And so here's the object that punctured through the skin, okay? Here's a blood vessel, and so that has been damaged. And so be mindful that there's blood running through this, right? So if you burst a blood vessel, or you damage a blood vessel, you're going to bleed. And so the immediate response to that injury is that the blood vessel that's damaged is going to do what's called vasoconstriction. So vaso, prefix for vessel, constriction means it's going to get more narrow. Why would it get more narrow? Because the narrower it is, the less blood that can go through it, which means the less blood that you're going to lose. In that area, the platelets are going to start to stick together and try to form a clot, and then some of the mast cells nearby are going to release chemicals to kind of aid in all of this process. So shortly following that, we're going to see some vascular reactions. So nearby blood vessels, the ones that are not damaged, they're going to dilate, which means they're going to get wider, they're going to increase blood flow, so you're going to get a lot more blood coming towards this area. And because there's more blood, it could also increase leakage of a fluid that's known as an exudate, so it could see some kind of clear fluid on the outside as well. So we've got all this blood moving towards that area. This is going to, again, increase the amount of liquid that's there, so we're going to see edema or swelling. We're going to see neutrophils jump into that area, try to eat or phagocytize foreign pathogens. That's going to lead to the formation of pus. And then finally, if enough cells have made their way there, the macrophages, other fibroblasts, they're going to initiate an immune response. They're going to start repairing the injury. And then what you may see is you may see some scarring left behind, depending on the damage. You may see some loss of some of the normal tissue, again, depending on the damage, but eventually it will heal. Now, two vocabulary terms that we always associate with inflammation and a response to that injury are diapedesis and chemotaxis. So diapedesis simply is the ability for cells in the bloodstream to migrate out towards the damaged tissues. It's called diapedesis, and it's literally where they kind of squeeze through the cells that make up those blood vessels. And then chemotaxis, if you remember, we talked about this word in Unit 1 in regards to flagella, right? So it was the ability of microbes to move towards or away from chemicals, depending on what type of chemical it was. And so your white blood cells actually have the ability to do this as well. So chemotaxis says they have the ability to sense specific chemicals, and those chemicals actually draw them to the site of injury. So those chemicals that the mast cells released help draw white blood cells to the actual area where they are needed. Objective number 8 also mentions what we call interferons. They play a role in your immune system. So what interferons are is that they're small proteins. They're produced by certain white blood cells, and their job is to interfere. So it mentions that they typically are produced in response to viruses, to RNA, some other types of antigens that may be produced, but again, their job is to interfere with viruses. They also have a lot of research gone into these. They also can interfere with the lytic cycles of viruses, as well as inhibit the expression of certain cancer genes. So interferons are something that are being used in therapy as far as viral infections and even cancer is concerned. So an interesting concept there. And then your very last objective in Chapter 14 mentions what's called a fever. Now typically we think fevers are bad, right? Because we know that if your body temperature gets too high, it can be detrimental to your body. It can actually kill you. But I need you to understand that what a fever is, and then that it actually can be beneficial. So fevers they're initiated or they're triggered by what we call pyrogens. So these are agents that trigger a fever. And what these pyrogens do is they reset the hypothalamus. Now remember, hypothalamus is a central region of your brain, and it controls a lot of things. One of the things it controls is body temperature. And so what happens is these pyrogens actually make their way to the hypothalamus, and they cause it to reset the temperature to go higher than it's supposed to go. And so this signals your muscles to increase heat production, vasoconstriction, and so we see our temperature rise. Now, again, a lot of people think that a fever is bad, and it can be, but there's actually benefits to fever, because with a fever, you actually inhibit those temperature-sensitive microorganisms. So the ones that actually preferred 98.6 degrees, the ones that were mesophiles, they like that middle temperature. Well, if you can get the temperature to rise, then you make a very inhospitable environment where they can't survive, right? It also impedes the nutrition of bacteria. It reduces the available iron. Heat does that, right? Because we're vasoconstricting, bloodstream's not carrying as much liquids, and that's where we carry iron, right? It also increases metabolism, increases chemical processes, stimulates immune reactions, and protective physiological processes. So even though a fever is typically noted as bad, it could also be beneficial. So quick check, and that's the end of Chapter 14.